Today, we begin a short series on the topic, Recovering Ourselves to Recover the World. I was actually considering starting with a different theme, but an earthquake erupted in the psychiatric world a couple days ago on September 4th, 2025, when a towering figure in the field passed away, Dr. Robert J. Lifton. He was aged 99, the same age as another great anti-nuclearist inspiration of mine who recently passed, Dr. Bernard Lown, of whom I've often spoken in these sessions. Hence, I thought it was a perfect way to begin this module. A New York Times obituary calls him a psychiatrist drawn to humanity's horrors. But I would go even further. I see the facing of humanity's inhumanity against itself as the beginning of resolution, renewal, and revival. The reason is this: countless psychological studies have shown that avoiding or repressing what Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called our shadow leads to even greater destruction, for our destructive tendencies return with a vengeance. Dr. Lifton himself often quoted the American poet Theodore Roethke, who stated, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see." Without addressing the darkness of human horrors, we cannot envision and forge a truly lasting path toward hope. A colleague and co-author, Stephen Moffat, wrote a wonderful eulogy for him entitled Robert J. Lifton, MD, Lifting Us Up from Our Human Abyss. I would agree with that. I first met Dr. Lifton when he was running the mass violence seminars at Harvard in the early 2000s, and soon joined his Wellfleet group, which formed in the 1960s, when he got together with developmental psychologist Erik Erikson and historian Bruce Maslach of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and formed a group to apply psychoanalysis to the study of history. They were essentially meetings in his Massachusetts home, focusing on psychological motivations for war, terrorism, and genocide. Dr. Lifton was Distinguished Professor Emeritus of John Jay College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, although he was a frequent visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. His interest in war and politics began in the early 1950s, when he served as an Air Force psychiatrist in Japan and Korea. He studied Hiroshima survivors and the doctors who aided Nazi war crimes. He was an outspoken critic of the American Psychological Association's aiding of government-sanctioned torture. And as many of you know, he joined me in criticizing the American Psychiatric Association's silencing of mental health experts so as to aid in Donald Trump's spread of a malignant normality. He wrote the foreword to the 2017 edition of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 Psychiatrists and Mental Health Experts Assess a President. To the end of his life, he continued to contribute to our activities, serving as a keynote speaker for my 2024 National Press Club conference, The More Dangerous State of the World and the Need for Fit Leadership, just a few months before the last presidential election. His most recent books are Losing Reality on Cults, Cultism, and the Mindset of Political and Religious Zealotry, and Surviving Our Catastrophes, Resilience and Renewal from Hiroshima to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, since I will not have a chance to invite him to this forum as I wish to, I would like to present his ideas in his own words. In my interview with him in 2020, he stated the following: I came to the idea of malignant normality from my study of Nazi doctors. I came to realize that as extreme and murderous as their behavior was, it was legal and what was rendered as normal, so that when a Nazi physician stood at a ramp at Auschwitz and selected Jews for the gas chamber, he was doing what was expected of him. He was doing his job in that structure. Now, Trump is not a Nazi, although he imposes his own malignant normality, which has caused our country to suffer, and indeed the rest of the world to suffer. And his malignant normality, as we have seen, includes continuous lying, the attack in a vicious and cruel fashion against people who simply tell the truth. We are currently living a malignant normality that beckons an understanding from a combined perspective of psychoanalysis and history. Neither area alone can give us a thorough understanding and the tools to confront it. That is what Dr. Lifton was teaching us. He continued in the interview, during the early Cold War, there were some psychiatrists actively supporting the government's policy toward the building of nuclear weapons and even the possibility of their use. Their goal was to calm the national population so that it would not be too anxious in relation to nuclear weapons. I and my work and others took the opposite view. It is appropriate for us to experience fear and to confront the source of the fear, including the grave problem of potential nuclear holocaust. In the present situation, most psychiatrists, even those who are most critical of our speaking out about Trump, I do not think you would find that they are seeking to promote Trump's vision or views, but I think they act out of an exaggerated protectiveness of the public image of their profession. It should not be tainted by anybody speaking out in what might be a political arena. That is a ridiculous position, of course, because failure to speak out is a political act as well. So I continued and asked him, given the relevance of his past research for what is happening right now, where did he see the American situation in the psychological unfolding of the history of a nation? This was back in 2020. And he answered, those are large questions, of course, and they confront us in the most extreme way with Trump. It is astounding and troubling that a person so immoral, one can call him cruel in his behavior, in his effort to destroy anyone who has stood in the way of his solipsistic reality, and in his willingness to bring about large numbers of deaths, which is, in effect, a willingness to kill large numbers of people. If he thinks it suits his needs, the needs of the self, and in his case, the needs of a kind of triumphalist self who beats down all opponents and is stronger than anyone else, and also in his more imaginative moments, he sees himself as a fixer and a savior of society. Still, even with an electoral defeat for Trump, there will be extensive work necessary to restore institutional structures because he will go down in history as a would-be destroyer of American institutions. That was my interview with him in 2020. We are now witnessing what Dr. Lifton predicted 5 years ago and reiterated at our conference last year.